Step into a whimsical world where magic collides with reality in Howl's moving castle. Follow the journey of Sophie, a young woman transformed into an elderly lady by a jealous witch's curse, as she finds herself in a moving castle owned by the charming yet unpredictable wizard Howl. As Sophie grapples with her newfound identity and her feelings for Howl, she discovers she possesses a unique power to heal not just herself, but also the chaos surrounding them. With the threat of the Witch of the Waste looming over their heads and a mischievous scarecrow complicating matters, Sophie must learn to embrace her courage and forge her own destiny in a tale filled with love, magic, and self-discovery, in which Howl expresses his feelings with green slime. Howl did not go out that day, nor for the next few days. Sophie sat quietly in the chair by the hearth, keeping out of his way and thinking. She saw that, much as Howl deserved it, she had been taking out her feelings on the castle when she was really angry with the Witch of the Waste, and she was a little upset at the thought that she was here on false pretenses. Howl might think Calcifer liked her, but Sophie knew Calcifer had simply seized on a chance to make a bargain with her. Sophie rather thought she had let Calcifer down. This state of mind did not last. Sophie discovered a pile of Michael's clothes that needed mending. She fetched out thimbles, scissors, and thread from her sewing pocket and set to work. By that evening she was cheerful enough to join in Calcifer's silly little song about saucepans. "Happy in your work?" Howl said sarcastically. "I need more to do," Sophie said. "My old suit needs mending if you have to feel busy," said Howl. This seemed to mean that Howl was no longer annoyed. Sophie was relieved. She had been almost frightened that morning. It was clear Howl had not yet caught the girl he was after. Sophie listened to Michael asking rather obvious questions about it, and Howl slithering neatly out of answering any of them. "He is a slitherer outer," Sophie murmured to a pair of Michael's socks. "Can't face his own wickedness." She watched Howl being restlessly busy in order to hide his discontent. That was something Sophie understood rather well. At the bench, Howl worked a good deal harder and faster than Michael, putting spells together in an expert but slapdash way. From the look on Michael's face, most of the spells were both unusual and hard to do. But Howl would leave a spell midway and dash up to his bedroom to look after something hidden and no doubt sinister going on up there, and then shortly race out into the yard to tinker with a large spell out there. Sophie opened the door a crack and was rather amazed to see the elegant wizard kneeling in the mud with his long sleeves tied behind his neck to keep them out of the way, while he carefully heaved a tangle of greasy metal into a special framework of some kind. That spell was for the king. Another overdressed and scented messenger arrived with a letter and a long speech in which he wondered if Howl could possibly spare time, no doubt invaluably, employed in other ways to bend his powerful and ingenious mind to a small problem experienced by His Royal Majesty, to wit, how an army might get its heavy wagons through a marsh and rough ground. Howl was wonderfully polite and long-winded in reply. He said no, but the messenger spoke for a further half hour, at the end of which he and Howl bowed to one another, and Howl agreed to do the spell. "This is a bit ominous," Howl said to Michael when the messenger had gone. "What did Suleiman have to get himself lost in the waste for? The king seems to think I'll do instead. He wasn't as inventive as you by all accounts," Michael said. "I'm too patient and polite," Howl said gloomily. "I should have overcharged him even more." Howl was equally patient and polite with customers from Porthaven, but as Michael anxiously pointed out, the trouble was that Howl did not charge these people enough. This was after Howl had listened for an hour to the reasons why a seaman's wife could not pay him a penny yet, and then promised a sea captain a wind spell for almost nothing. Howl eluded Michael's arguments by giving him a magic lesson. Sophie sewed buttons on Michael's shirts and listened to Howl going, "Through a spell with Michael. I know I'm slapdash," he was saying, "but there's no need for you to copy me. Always read it right through. Carefully first. The shape of it should tell you a lot, whether it's self-fulfilling or self-discovering or simple incantation or mixed action and speech. When you've decided that, go through again and decide which bits mean what they say and which bits are put as a puzzle. You're getting on to more powerful kinds now. You'll find every spell of power has at least one deliberate mistake or mystery in it to prevent accidents. You have to spot those. Now take this spell. Listening to Michael's halting replies to Howl's questions, and watching Howl scribble remarks on the paper with a strange, everlasting quill pen, Sophie realized that she could learn a lot too. It dawned on her that if Martha could discover the spell to swap herself and Lettie about at Mrs. Fairfax's, then she ought to be able to do the same here. With a bit of luck, there might be no need to rely on Calcifer. When Howl was satisfied that Michael had forgotten all about how much or how little he charged people in Porthaven, he took him out into the yard to help with the king's spell. Sophie creaked to her feet and hobbled to the bench. The spell was clear enough, but Howl's scrawled remarks defeated her. "I've never seen such writing," she grumbled to the human skull. "Does he use a pen or a poker?" She sorted eagerly through every scrap of paper on the bench and examined the powders and liquids in the crooked jars. "Yes, let's admit it," she told the skull. "I snoop, and I have my proper reward. I can find out how to cure foul pests and abate whooping cough, raise a wind, and remove hairs from the face. If Martha had found this lot, she'd still be at Mrs. Fairfax's." Howl, it seemed to Sophie, went and examined all the things she had, moved when he came in from the yard, but that seemed to be only restlessness. He seemed not to know what to do with himself after that. Sophie heard him roving up and down during the night. He was only an hour in the bathroom the next morning. He seemed not to be able to contain himself while Michael put on his best plum velvet suit, ready to go to the palace in Kingsbury, and the two of them wrapped the bulky spell up in golden paper. The spell must have been surprisingly light for its size. Michael could carry it on his own easily, with both his arms wrapped round it. Howl turned the knob over the door, read down for him, and sent him out into the street among the painted houses. "They're expecting it," Howl said. "You should only have to wait most of the morning. Tell them a child could work it. Show them. And when you come back, I'll have a spell of power for you to get to work on. So long." He shut the door and roved around the room again. "My feet itch," he said suddenly. "I'm going for a walk on the hills. Tell Michael the spell I promised him is on the bench. And here's for you to keep busy with." Sophie found a gray and scarlet suit, as fancy as the blue and silver. One dropped into her lap from nowhere. Howl, meanwhile, picked up his guitar from its corner, turned the doorknob green down, and stepped out among the scudding heather above Market Shipping. "His feet itch," grumbled Calcifer. There was a fog down in Porthaven. Calcifer was low among his logs, moving uneasily this way and that to avoid drips in the chimney. "How does he think I feel stuck in a damp grate like this?" "Then you'll have to give me a hint at least about how to break you contract," Sophie says, shaking out his gray and scarlet suit. "Goodness, you're a fine suit, even if you're a bit worn, built to pull in the girls, aren't you?" "I have given you hint," Calcifer fizzed. "Then you'll have to give it to me again." "I didn't catch it," Sophie said, as she laid the suit down and hobbled to the door. "If I give you a hint and tell you it's a hint, it will be information, and I'm not allowed to give that," Calcifer said. "Where are you going?" "To do something I didn't dare do until they were both out," Sophie said. She twisted the square knob over the door until the black blob pointed downward. Then she opened the door. There was nothing outside. It was neither black nor gray nor white. It was not thick or transparent. It did not move. It had no smell and no feel. When Sophie put a very cautious finger out into it, it was neither hot nor cold. It felt of nothing. It seemed utterly and completely nothing. "What is this?" she asked Calcifer. Calcifer was as interested as Sophie. His blue face was leaning right out of the grate to see the door. He had forgotten the fog. "I don't know," he whispered. "I only maintain it. All I know is that it's on the side of the castle that no one can walk around. It feels quite far away." "It feels beyond the moon," said Sophie. She shut the door and turned the knob green downward. She hesitated a minute and then started to hobble to the stairs. "He's locked it," said Calcifer. He told me to tell you if you tried to snoop again." "Oh," said Sophie. "What has he got up there?" "I've no idea," said Calcifer. "I don't know anything about upstairs. If you only knew how frustrating it is. I can't even really see outside the castle, only enough to see what direction I'm going in." Sophie, feeling equally frustrated, sat down and began mending the gray and scarlet suit. Michael came in quite soon after that. "The king saw me at once," he said. He looked round the room. His eyes went to the empty corner where the guitar usually stood. "Oh no," he said, "not the lady friend again. I thought she'd fallen in love with him and it was all over days ago. What's keeping her?" Calcifer fizzed wickedly. "You got the signs wrong. Heartless Howl is. Finding this lady rather tough." He decided to leave her alone for a few days to see if that would help. "That's all." "Bother!" And Michael, "That's bound to mean trouble." And here I was hoping Howl was almost sensible again. Sophie banged the suit down on her knees. "Really," she said, "how can you both talk like that about such utter wickedness? At least I suppose I can't blame Calcifer, since he's an evil demon. But you, Michael." "I don't think I'm evil," Calcifer protested, "but I'm not calm about it if that's what you think." Michael said, "If you knew the trouble we've had because Howl will keep falling in love like this. We've had lawsuits and suitors with swords and mothers with rolling pins and fathers and uncles with cudgels and aunts. Aunts are terrible. They go for you with hat pins. But the worst is when the girl herself finds out where Howl lives and turns up at the door, crying and miserable. Howl goes out through the back door and Calcifer, and I have to deal with them all." "I hate the unhappy ones," Calcifer said. "They drip on me. I'd rather have them angry." "Now let's get this straight," Sophie said, clenching her fist knobbly in red satin. "What does Howl do to these poor females? I was told he ate their hearts and took their souls away." Michael laughed uncomfortably. "Then you must come from Market Chipping." "Howl sent me down there to blacken his name when we first set up the castle." I said that sort of thing. It's what ants usually say. It's only true in a manner of speaking." "Howl's very fickle," said Calcifer. "He's only interested until the girl falls in love with him. Then he can't be bothered with her." "But he can't rest until he's made her love him," Michael said eagerly. "You can't get any sense out of him until he has. I always look forward to the time when the girl falls for him. Things get better then." "Until they track him down," said Calcifer. "You'd think he'd have the sense to give them a false name," Sophie said scornfully. The scorn was to hide the fact that she was feeling somewhat foolish. "Oh, he always does," Michael said. "He loves giving false names and posing as things. He does it even when he's not courting girls. Haven't you noticed that he's Sorcerer Jenkin in Porthaven and Wizard Pendragon in Kingsbury, as well as horrible Howl in the castle?" Sophie had not noticed, which made her feel more foolish still, and feeling foolish made her angry. "Well, I think it's still wicked going around making poor girls unhappy," she said. "It's heartless and pointless." "He's made that way," said Calcifer. Michael pulled a T3-legged stool up to the fire and sat on it while Sophie sewed, telling her of Howl's conquests and some of the trouble that had happened afterward. Sophie muttered at the fine suit. She still felt very foolish. "So you ate hearts, did you, Suit? Why do ants put things so oddly when they talk about their nieces? Probably fancied you themselves, my good Suit. How would you feel with a raging ant after you, eh?" As Michael told her the story of the particular aunt he had in mind, it occurred to Sophie that it was probably just as well the rumors of Howl had come to market, chipping in those words. She could imagine a strong-minded girl like Lettie otherwise getting very interested in Howl and ending up very unhappy. Michael had just suggested lunch, and Calcifer, as usual, had groaned when Howl flung open the door and came in, more discontented than ever. "Something to eat," said Sophie. "No," said Howl. "Hot water in the bathroom, Calcifer." He stood moodily in the bathroom door a moment. "Sophie, have you tidied this shelf of spells in here by any chance?" Sophie felt more foolish than ever. Nothing would have possessed her to admit she had gone through all those packets and jars looking for pieces of girl. "I haven't touched a thing," she replied virtuously as she went to get the frying pan. "I hope you didn't," Michael said uneasily as the bathroom door slammed shut. Rinsings and gushings came from the bathroom while Sophie freed lunch. "He's using a lot of hot water," Calcifer said from under the pan. "I think he's tinting his hair." "I hope you left the hair spells alone." For a plain man with mud-colored hair, he's terribly vain about his looks. "Oh, shut up," snapped Sophie. "I put everything back just where I found it." She was so cross that she emptied the pan of eggs and bacon over Calcifer. Calcifer, of course, ate them with enormous enthusiasm and much flaring and gobbling. Sophie fried more over the spitting flames. She and Michael ate them. They were clearing away, and Calcifer was running his blue tongue round his purple lips when the bathroom door crashed open and Howl shot out, wailing with despair. "Look at this," he shouted. "Look at it! What has that one-woman force of chaos done to these spells?" Sophie and Michael whirled round and looked at Howl. His hair was wet, but apart from that, neither of them could see that it looked any different. "If you mean me," Sophie began. "I do mean you. Look!" Howl shrieked. He sat down with a thump on the three-legged stool and jabbed at his wet head with his finger. "Look, survey, inspect. My hair is ruined. I look like a pan of bacon and eggs." Michael and Sophie bent nervously over Howl's head. It seemed the usual flaxen color right to the roots. The only difference might have been a slight, very slight trace of red. Sophie found that agreeable. It reminded her a little of the color her own hair should have been. "I think it's very nice," she said. "Nice!" screamed Howl. "You would. You did it on purpose. You couldn't rest until you made me miserable too. Look at it. It's ginger. I shall have to hide until it's grown out." He spread his arms out passionately. "Despair," he yelled. "Anguish. Horror." The room turned dim. Huge, cloudy, human-looking shapes bellied up in all four corners and advanced on Sophie and Michael, howling as they came. The howls began as moaning horror and went up to despairing brays and then up again to screams of pain and terror. Sophie pressed her hands to her ears, but the screams pressed through her hands louder and louder still, more horrible every second. Calcifer shrank hurriedly down in the grate and flickered his way under his lowest log. Michael grabbed Sophie by her elbow and dragged her to the door. He spun the knob to blew down, kicked the door open, and got them both out into the street in Porthaven as fast as he could. The noise was almost as horrible out there. Doors were opening all down the road, and people were running out with their hands over. "There is. Ought we to leave him alone in that state?" Sophie quavered. "Yes," said Michael. "If he thinks it's your fault, then definitely." They hurried through the town, pursued by throbbing screams. Quite. A crowd came with them. In spite of the fact that the fog had now become a seeping sea drizzle, everyone made for the harbor or the sands, where the noise seemed easier to bear. The frayed vastness of the sea soaked it up a little. Everyone stood in damp huddles looking out at the misty white horizon and the dripping ropes on the moored ships, while the noise became a gigantic, heartbroken sobbing. Sophie reflected that she was seeing the sea close for the first time in her life. It was pity that she was not enjoying it more. The sobs died away to vast, miserable sighs, and then to silence. People began cautiously to go back into the town. Some of them came timidly up to Sophie. "Is something wrong with the poor sorcerer, Mrs. Witch?" "He's a little unhappy today," Michael said. "Come on, I think we can risk going back now." As they went along the quayside, several sailors called out anxiously from the moored ships, wanting to know if the noise meant storms or bad luck. "Not at all," Sophie called back. "It's all over now." But it was not. They came back to the wizard's house, which was an ordinary crooked little building from the outside that Sophie would not have recognized if Michael had not been with her. Michael opened the shabby little door rather cautiously. Inside, Howl was still sitting in the stool. He sat in an attitude of utter despair, and he was covered all over in thick green slime. There were horrendous, dramatic, violent quantities of green slime, oodles of it. It covered Howl completely. It draped his head and shoulders in sticky dollops, heaping on his knees and hands, trickling in glops down his legs and dripping off the stool in sticky strands. It was in oozing ponds and crawling pools over most of the floor. Long fingers of it had crept into the heart. It smelled vile. "Save me," Calcifer cried in a hoarse whisper. He was down to 2 desperately flickering small flames. "This stuff is going to put me out." Sophie held up her skirt and marched as near Howl as she could get, which was not very near. "Stop it," she said. "Stop it at once. You are behaving just like a baby." Howl did not move or answer. His face stared from behind the slime, white and tragic and wide-eyed. "What shall we do? Is he dead?" Michael asked, jittering beside the door. Michael was a nice boy, Sophie thought, but a bit helpless in a crisis. No, of course he isn't," she said. "And if it wasn't for Calcifer, he could behave like a jellied eel all day for all I care." Open the bathroom door. While Michael was working his way between pools of slime to the bathroom, Sophie threw her apron into the hearth to stop more of the stuff getting near Calcifer and snatched up the shovel. She scooped up loads of ash and dumped them in the biggest pools of slime. It hissed violently. The room filled with steam and smelled worse than ever. Sophie furled up her sleeves, bent her back to get a good purchase on the wizard's slimy knees, and pushed Howl, stool and all, toward the bathroom. Her feet slipped and skidded in the slime, but of course the ooziness helped the stool to move too. Michael came and pulled at Howl's slime-draped sleeves. Together they trundled him into the bathroom. There, since Howl still refused to move, they shunted him into the shower stall. "Hot water, Calcifer," Sophie panted grimly. "Very hot. It took an hour to wash the slime off Howl." It took Michael another hour to persuade Howl to get off the stool and into dry clothes. Luckily, the gray and scarlet suit Sophie had just mended had been draped over the back of the chair, out of the way of the slime. The blue and silver suit was ruined. Sophie told Michael to put it in the bath to soak. Meanwhile, mumbling and grumbling, she fetched more hot water. She turned the doorknob green down and swept all the slime out onto the moors. The castle left a trail like a snail in the heather, but it was an easy way to get rid of the slime. There were some advantages to living in a moving castle, Sophie thought as she washed the floor. She wondered if Howl's noises had been coming from the castle too, in which case she pitied the folk of Market, chipping. By this time, Sophie was tired and cross. She knew the green slime was Howl's revenge on her, and she was not at all prepared to be sympathetic when Michael finally led Howl forth from the bathroom, clothed in gray and scarlet, and sat him tenderly in the chair by the hearth. "That was plain stupid," Calcifer sputtered. "Were you trying to get rid of the best part of your magic or something?" Howl took no notice. He just sat, looking tragic and shivering. "I can't get him to speak," Michael whispered miserably. "It's just a tantrum," Sophie said. "Martha and Lettie were good at having tantrums. She knew how to deal with those. On the other hand, it is quite a risk to spank a wizard for getting hysterical about his hair. Anyway, Sophie's experience told her that tantrums are seldom about the thing they appear to be about. She made Calcifer move over so that she could balance a pan of milk on the logs. When it was warm, she thrust a mugful into Howl's hands. "Drink it," she said. "Now, what's all this fuss about? Is it this young lady you keep? Going to see?" Howl sipped the milk dolefully. "Yes," he said. "I left her alone to see. If that would make her remember me fondly, and it hasn't. She wasn't sure even when I last saw her. Now she tells me there's another fellow." He sounded so miserable that Sophie felt quite sorry for him. Now his hair was dry. She noticed guiltily it really was almost pink. "She's the most beautiful girl there ever was in these parts," Howl went on mournfully. "I love her so dearly, but she scorns my deep devotion and get sorry for another fellow. How can she have another fellow after all this attention I've given her? They usually get rid of the other fellows as soon as I come along. Sophie's sympathy shrank quite sharply. It occurred to her that if Howl could cover himself with green slime so easily, then he could just as easily turn his hair the proper color. Then why don't you feed the girl a love potion and get it over with? Oh no, said Howl, that's not playing the game. That would spoil all the fun. Sophie's sympathy shrank again. A game, was it? Don't you ever give a thought for the poor girl, she snapped. Howl finished the milk and gazed into the mug with a sentimental smile. I think of her all the time, he said. Lovely, lovely Lettie Hatter. Sophie's sympathy went for good with a sharp bang. A good deal of anxiety took its place. Oh, Martha, she thought, you have been busy. So it wasn't anyone in Cesare's you were talking about, in which a scarecrow prevents Sophie from leaving the castle. Only a particularly bad attack of aches and pains prevented Sophie from setting out for Market Chipping that evening. But the drizzle in Porthaven had gotten into her bones. She lay in her cubbyhole and ached and worried about Martha. It might not be so bad, she thought. She only had to tell Martha that the suitor she was not sure about was none other than Wizard Howl. That would scare Martha off. And she would tell Martha that the way to scare Howl off was to announce that she was in love with him and then perhaps to threaten him with ants. Sophie was still creaking when she got up next morning. Curse the witch of the waste, she muttered to her stick as she got it out, ready to leave. She could hear Howl singing in the bathroom as if he had never had a tantrum in his life. She tiptoed to the door as fast as she could hobble. Howl, of course, came out of the bathroom before she reached it. Sophie looked at him sourly. He was all spruce and dashing, scented gently with apple blossom. The sunlight from the window dazzled off his gray and scarlet suit and made a faintly pink halo of his hair. I think my hair looks rather good this color, he said. Do you indeed? Grumped Sophie. It goes with this suit, said Howl. You have quite a touch with your needle, don't you? You've given the suit more style somehow. Huh, said Sophie. Howl stopped with his hand on the knob above the door. Aches and pains troubling you? He said. Or has something annoyed you? Annoyed, said Sophie. Why should I be annoyed? Someone only filled the castle with rotten aspic and deafened everyone in. Porthaven and scared Calcifer to a cinder and broke a few hundred hearts. Why should that annoy me? Howl laughed. I apologize, he said, turning the knob to red down. The king wants to see me today. I shall probably be kicking my heels in the palace until evening, but I can do something for your rheumatism when I get her back. Don't forget to tell Michael I left that spell for him on the bench. He smiled sunnily at Sophie and stepped out among the spires of Kingsbury. And you think that makes it all right? Sophie growled as the door shut, but the smile had mollified her. If that smile works on me, then it's no wonder poor Martha doesn't know her own mind, she muttered. I need another log before you go, Calcifer reminded her. Sophie hobbled to drop another log into the grate. Then she set off to the door again. But here Michael came running downstairs and snatched the remains of a loaf off the bench as he ran to the door. You don't mind, do you? He said in an agitated way. I'll bring a fresh loaf when I come back. I've got something very urgent to see to today, but I'll be back by evening if the sea captain calls for his wind. Spell is on the end of the bench, clearly labeled. He turned the knob green downward and jumped out onto the windy hillside, loaf clutched to his stomach. See you, he shouted as the castle trundled away past him and the door slammed. Botheration, said Sophie. Calcifer, how does a person open the door when there's no one inside the castle? I'll open it for you, or Michael. Howl does it himself, said Calcifer, so no one would be locked out when Sophie left. She was not at all sure she would be coming back. but she did not intend to tell Calcifer. She gave Michael time to get well on the way to wherever he was, going and set off for the door again. This time, Calcifer stopped her. "If you're going to be away long," he said, "you might leave some logs where I can reach them." "Can you pick up logs?" Sophie asked, intrigued in spite of her impatience. For answer, Calcifer stretched out a blue arm-shaped flame divided into green finger-like flames at the end. It was not very long, nor did it look strong. "See, I can almost reach the hearth," he said proudly. Sophie stacked a pile of logs in front of the grate so that Calcifer could at least reach the top one. "You're not to burn them until you've got them in the grate," she warned him, and she set off for the door yet again. This time somebody knocked on it before she got there. It was one of those days, Sophie thought. It must be the sea captain. She put up her hand to turn the knob, blew down. "No, it's the castle door," Calcifer said. "But I'm not sure." Then it was Michael back for some reason, Sophie thought as she opened the door. A turnip face leered at her. She smelled mildew against the wide blue sky. A ragged arm ending in a stump of a stick wheeled round and tried to paw at her. It was a scarecrow. It was only made of sticks and rags, but it was alive, and it was trying to come in. "Calcifer!" Sophie screamed. "Make the castle go faster!" The stone blocks round the doorway crunched and grated. The green-brown moorland was suddenly rushing past. The scarecrow's stick arm thumped on the door and then went scraping along the wall of the castle as the castle left it behind. It wheeled its other arm round and seemed to try to clutch at the stonework. It meant to get into the castle if it could. Sophie slammed the door shut. This, she thought, just showed how stupid it was for an eldest child to try and seek her fortune. That was the scarecrow she had propped in the hedge on her way to the castle. She had made jokes to it. Now, as if her jokes had brought it to evil life, it had followed her all the way here and tried to paw at her face. She ran to the window to see if the thing was still trying to get into the castle. Of course, all she could see was a sunny day in Porthaven, with a dozen sails going up a dozen masts beyond the roofs opposite, and a cloud of seagulls circling the blue sky. "That's the difficulty of being in several places at once," Sophie said to the human skull on the bench. Then, all at once, she discovered the real drawback to being an old woman. Her heart gave a leap and a little stutter, and then seemed to be trying to bang its way out of her chest. It hurt. She shook all over, and her knees trembled. She rather thought she might be dying. It was all she could do to get to the chair by the hearth. She sat there panting, clutching her chest. "Is something the matter?" Calcifer asked. "Yes, my heart. There was a scarecrow at the door." Sophie gasped. "What has a scarecrow to do with your heart?" Calcifer asked. "It was trying to get in here. It gave me a terrible fright. And my heart, but you wouldn't understand, you silly young demon." Sophie panted. "You haven't got a heart." "Yes, I have," Calcifer said, as proudly as he had revealed his arm down in the glowing part under the log. "And don't call me young. I'm a good million years older than you are. Can I reduce the speed of the castle now?" "Only if the scarecrow's gone," said Sophie. "Or has it?" "I can't tell," said Calcifer. "It's not flesh and blood, you see," I told you. "I couldn't really see outside." Sophie got up and dragged herself to the door again, feeling ill. She opened it slowly and cautiously. Green steepness, rocks, and purple slopes whirled past, making her feel dizzy, but she took a grip on the doorframe and leaned out to look along the wall to the moorland they were leaving behind. The scarecrow was about 50 yards to the rear. It was hopping from clump to heather clump with a sinister sort of valiance, holding its fluttering stick arms at an angle to balance it on the hillside. As Sophie watched, the castle left it further behind. It was slow, but it was still following. She shut the door. "It's still there," she said, "hopping after us. Go faster." But that upsets all my calculations, Calcifer explained. I was aiming to circle the hills and get back to where Michael left us in time to pick him up this evening. Then go twice as fast and circle the hills twice, as long as you leave that horrible thing behind, said Sophie. What a fuss, Calcifer grumbled. But he increased the castle's speed. Sophie could actually, for the first time, feel it rumbling around her as she sat huddled in her chair, wondering if she was dying. She did not want to die yet before she had talked to Martha. As the day went on, everything in the castle began to jiggle with its speed. Bottles chinked. The skull clattered on the bench. Sophie could hear things falling off the shelf in the bathroom and splashing into the bath where Howl's blue and silver suit was still soaking. She began to feel a little better. She dragged herself to the door again and looked out, with her hair flying in the wind. The ground was streaking past underneath. The hills seemed to be spinning slowly as the castle sped across them. The grinding and rumbling nearly deafened her, and smoke was puffing out behind in blasts. But the scarecrow was a tiny black dot on a distant slope by then. Next time she looked, it was out of sight entirely. Good. Then I shall stop for the night, said Calcifer. That was quite a strain. The rumbling died away. Things stopped jiggling. Calcifer went too, sleep in the way fires do, sinking among the logs until they were rosy. Cylinders plated with white ash, with only a hint of blue and green, deep underneath. Sophie felt quite spry again by then. She went and fished 6 packets and a bottle out of the slimy water in the bath. The packets were soaked. She did not dare leave them that way after yesterday, so she laid them on the floor and very cautiously sprinkled them with the stuff labeled drying power. They were dried almost instantly. This was encouraging. Sophie let the water out of the bath and tried the power on Howl's suit. That dried too. It was still stained green and rather smaller than it had been, but it cheered Sophie up to find that she could put at least something right. She felt cheerful enough to busy herself getting supper. She bundled everything on the bench into a heap round the skull at one end and began chopping onions. At least your eyes don't water, my friend, she told the skull. Count your blessings. The door sprang open. Sophie nearly cut herself in her fright, thinking it was the scarecrow again. But it was Michael. He burst jubilantly in. He dumped a loaf, a pie, and a pink and white striped box on top of the onions. Then he seized Sophie round her skinny waist and danced her round the room. It's all right. It's all right, he shouted joyfully. Sophie hopped and stumbled to keep out of the way of Michael's boots. Steady, steady, she gasped, giddily trying to hold the knife where it would not cut either of them. What is all right? Lettie loves me, Michael shouted, dancing her almost into the bathroom and then almost into the hearth. She's never even seen Howl. It was all a mistake. H.E. spun them both round in the middle of the room. Will you let me go before this knife cuts one of us? Sophie squawked, and perhaps explain a little. Wee-oop, Michael shouted. He whirled Sophie to the chair and dumped her into it, where she sat gasping. Last night I wished you'd dyed his hair blue, he said. I don't mind now. When Howl said, Lettie Hatter, I even thought of dyeing him blue myself. You can see the way he talks. I knew he was going to drop this girl just like all the others, as soon as he got her to love him. And when I thought it was my Lettie, anyway, you know he said there was another fellow, and I thought that was me. So I tore down to market chipping today, and it was all right. Howl must be after some other girl with the same name. Lettie's never seen him. Let's get this straight, Sophie said dizzily. We are talking about the Lettie Hatter who works in Cesari's pastry shop, are we? Of course we are, Michael said jubilantly. I've loved her ever since she started work there, and I almost couldn't believe when she said she loved me. She had hundreds of admirers. I wouldn't have been surprised if Howl was one of them. I'm so relieved. I got you a cake from Cesare's to celebrate. Where did I put it? Oh, here it is. He thrust the pink and white box at Sophie. Onion fell off it into her lap. How old are you, my child? Sophie asked. 15 last May Day, said Michael. Calcifer sent fireworks up from the castle. Didn't you, Calcifer? Oh, he's asleep. You're probably thinking I'm too young to be engaged. I've still got 3 years of my apprenticeship to run, and Lettie's got even longer, but we promise one another, and we don't mind waiting. Then Michael was about the right age for Martha, Sophie thought, and she knew by now he was a nice, steady lad with a career as a wizard ahead of him. Bless Martha's heart. When she thought back to that bewildering May Day, she realized that Michael had been one of that shouting group leaning on the counter in front of Martha, but Howl had been outside in Market Square. Are you sure your Lettie was telling the truth about Howl? She asked anxiously. Positive, said Michael. I know when she's lying. She stops twiddling her thumbs. She does too, said Sophie, chuckling. How do you know? Michael asked in surprise. Because she's my sister's granddaughter, said Sophie, and as a small girl she was not always terribly truthful. But she's quite young in her. Well, suppose she changes as she grows. She may not look quite the same in a year or so. Neither will I, said Michael. People our age change all the time. It won't worry us. She'll still be Lettie. In a manner of speaking, Sophie thought, but suppose she was. Telling the truth, she went on anxiously, and she just knew how, under a false name. Don't worry, I thought of that, said Michael. I described Howl you. Must admit he's pretty recognizable, and she really hadn't seen him or his wretched guitar. I didn't even have to tell her he doesn't know how to play the thing. She never set eyes on him, and she twiddled her thumbs all the time she said she hadn't. That's a relief, Sophie said, lying stiffly back in her chair. And it certainly was a relief about Martha. But it was not much of a relief, because Sophie was positive that the only other Lettie Hatter in the district was the real one. If there had been another, someone would have come into the hat shop and gossiped about it. It sounded like strong-minded Lettie not giving in to Howl. And what worried Sophie was that Lettie had told Howl her real name. She might not be sure about him, but she liked him enough to trust him with an important secret like that. Don't look so anxious, Michael laughed, leaning on the back of the chair. Have a look at the cake I brought you. As Sophie started opening the box, it dawned on her that Michael had gone from seeing her as a natural disaster to actually liking her. She was so pleased and grateful that she decided to tell Michael the whole truth about Lettie and Martha and herself, too. It was only fair to let him know the sort of family he meant to marry into. The box came open. It was Cesare's most luscious cake, covered in cream and cherries and little curls of chocolate. Oh, said Sophie. The square knob over the door clicked round to red blob down of its own accord, and Howl came in. What a marvelous cake, my favorite. Kind, he said. Where did you get it? I called in at Cesare's, Michael said in a sheepish self-conscious way. Sophie looked up at Howl. Something was always going to interrupt her when she decided to say she was under a spell. Even a wizard, it seemed. It looks worth the walk, Howl said, inspecting the cake. I've heard Cesare's is better than any of the cake shops in Kingsbury. Stupid of me never to have been in the place. And is that a pie I see on the bench? He went over to look. Pie and a bed of raw onions, human skull looking put upon. He picked up the skull and knocked an onion ring out of its eye socket. I see Sophie has been busy again. Couldn't you have restrained her, my friend? The skull yattered its teeth at him. Howl looked startled and put it down hastily. Is something the matter? Michael asked. He seemed to know the signs. There is, said Howl. I shall have to find someone to blacken my name to the king. Was there something wrong with the wagon spell? Said Michael. No, it worked perfectly. That's the trouble, Howl said, restlessly twiddling an onion ring on one finger. The king's trying to pin me down to do something else now. Calcifer, If we're not very careful, he's going to appoint me royal magician." Calcifer did not answer. Howl roved back to the fireside and realized Calcifer was asleep. "Wake him up, Michael," he said. "I need to consult him." Michael threw 2 logs on Calcifer and called him. Nothing happened, apart from a thin spire of smoke. "Calcifer!" Howl shouted. That did no good either. Howl gave Michael a mystified look and picked up the poker, which was something Sophie had never seen him do before. "Sorry, Calcifer," he said, jabbing under the unburned logs. "Wake up!" One thick black cloud of smoke rolled up and stopped. "Go away!" Calcifer grunted. "I'm tired." At this, Howl looked thoroughly alarmed. "What's wrong with him? I've never known him like this before." "I think it was the scarecrow," Sophie said. Howl swiveled around on his knees and leveled his glass marble eyes at her. "What have you done now?" He went on staring while Sophie explained. "A scarecrow?" he said. Calcifer agreed to speed up the castle because of a scarecrow. "Dear Sophie, do please tell me how you bully a fire demon into being that obliging. I'd dearly love to know." "I didn't bully him," said Sophie. "It gave me a turn and he was sorry." For me, it gave her a turn and Calcifer was sorry for her, Howl repeated. "My good Sophie, Calcifer is never sorry for anyone. Anyway, I hope you enjoy raw onions and cold pie for your supper because you've almost put Calcifer out." "There's the cake," Michael said, trying to make peace. The food did seem to improve Howl's temper, although he kept casting anxious looks at the unburning logs in the hearth all the time they were eating. The pie was good cold, and the onions were quite tasty when Sophie had soaked them in vinegar. The cake was superb. While they were eating it, Michael risked asking Howl what the king had wanted. "Nothing definite yet," Howl said gloomily, "but he was sounding me out about his brother, quite ominously. Apparently they had a good old argument before Prince Justin stormed off, and people are talking. The king obviously wanted me to volunteer to look for his brother. And like a fool, I went and said I didn't think Wizard Suleiman was dead, and that made matters worse." "Why do you want to slither out of looking for the prince?" Sophie demanded. "Don't you think you can find him? Rude as well as a bully, aren't you?" Howl said. He had still not forgiven her about Calcifer. "I want to get out of it because I know I can find him if you must know. Justin was great buddies with Suleiman, and the argument was because he told the king he was going to look for him. He didn't think the king should have sent Suleiman to the waste in the first place. Now, even you must know, there is a certain lady in the waste who is very bad news. She promised to fry me alive last year, and she sent out a curse after me that I've only avoided so far because I had the sense to give her a false name." Sophie was almost awed. "You mean you jilted the witch of the waste?" Howl cut himself another lump of cake, looking sad and honorable. "That is not the way to put it. I admit, I thought I was fond of her for a time. She is in some ways a very sad lady, very unloved. Every man in Ingery is scared stiff of her. You ought to know how that feels, Sophie dear." Sophie's mouth opened in utter indignation. Michael said quickly, "Do you think we should move the castle? That's why you invented it, wasn't it?" "It depends on Calcifer." Howl looked over his shoulder at the barely smoking logs again. "I must say, if I think of the king and the witch both after me, I get a craving for planting the castle on a nice frowning rock 1,000 miles away." Michael obviously wished he had not spoken. Sophie could see he was thinking that 1,000 miles away was a terribly long way from Martha. "But what happens to your Lettie Hatter?" she said to Howl, "if you're up and move?" "I expect that will be all over by then," Howl said absently. "But if I could only think of a way to get the king off my back." "I know!" He lifted his fork with a melting hunk of cream and cake on it and pointed it at Sophie. "You can blacken my name to the king. You can't pretend to be my old mother and plead for your blue-eyed boy." He gave Sophie the smile which had no doubt charmed the witch of the waste and possibly Lettie too, firing it along the fork, across the cream, straight into Sophie's eyes, dazzlingly. "If you can bully Calcifer, the king should give you no trouble at all." Sophie stared through the dazzle and said nothing. This, she thought, was where she slithered out. She was leaving. It was too bad about Calcifer's contract. She had had enough of Howl. First green slime, then glaring at her for something Calcifer had done quite freely, and now this. Tomorrow she would slip off to upper folding and tell Lettie all about it, in which Sophie leaves the castle in several directions at once. To Sophie's relief, Calcifer blazed up bright and cheerful next morning. If she had not had enough of Howl, she would have been almost touched by how glad Howl was to see Calcifer. "I thought she'd done for you, you old ball of gas," Howl said, kneeling at the hearth with his sleeves trailing in the ash. "I was only tired," Calcifer said. "There was some kind of drag on the castle. I'd never taken it that fast before." "Well, don't let her make you do it again," said Howl. He stood up, gracefully brushing ash off his gray and scarlet suit. "Make a start on. That spell today, Michael, and if anyone comes from the king, I'm away on urgent private business until tomorrow. I'm going to see Lettie, but you needn't tell him that." He picked up his guitar and opened the door with the knob green down onto the wide, cloudy hills. The scarecrow was there again. When Howl opened the door, it pitched sideways across him with its turnip face in his chest. The guitar uttered an awful twang-oing. Sophie gave a faint squawk of terror and hung onto the chair. One of the scarecrow's stick arms was scraping stiffly around to get a purchase on the door. From the way Howl's feet were braced, it was clear he was being shoved quite hard. There was no doubt the thing was determined to get into the castle. Calcifer's blue face leaned out of the grate. Michael stood stock still, beyond. "There really is a scarecrow," they both said. "Oh, is there? Do tell." Howl panted. He got one foot up against the door frame and heaved. The scarecrow flew lumpishly away backward to land with a light rustle in the heather some yards off. It sprang up instantly and came hopping towards the castle again. Howl hurriedly laid the guitar on the doorstep and jumped down to meet it. "No, you don't, my friend," he said with one hand out. "Go back where you came from." He walked forward slowly, still with his hand out. The scarecrow retreated a little, hopping slowly and warily backward. When Howl stopped, the scarecrow stopped too, with its one leg planted in the heather and its ragged arms tilting this way and that like a person sparring for an opening. The rags fluttering on its arms seemed a mad imitation of Howl's sleeves. "So you won't go," Howl said, and the turnip head slowly moved from side to side. "No, I'm afraid you'll have to," Howl said. "You scare Sophie, and there's no knowing what she'll do when she's scared. Come to think of it, you scare me too." Howl's arms moved heavily, as if he was lifting a large weight, until they were raised high above his head. He shouted out a strange word, which was half hidden in a crack of sudden thunder, and the scarecrow went soaring away. Up and backward it went, rags fluttering, arms wheeling in protest, up and out and on, until it was a soaring speck in the sky, then a vanishing point in the clouds, and then not to be seen at all. Howl lowered his arms and came back to the doorway, mopping his face on the back of his hand. "I take back my hard words, Sophie," he said, panting. "That thing was alarming. It may have been dragging the castle back all yesterday. It had some of the strongest magic I've met. Whatever was it all that was left of the last person you cleaned for?" Sophie gave a weak little cackle of laughter. Her heart was behaving badly again. Howl realized something was wrong with her. He jumped indoors across his guitar, took hold of her elbow and sat her in the chair. "Take it easy now." Something happened between Howl and Calcifer. Then Sophie felt it, because she was being held by Howl and Calcifer was still leaning out of the grate. Whatever it was, her heart began to behave properly again almost at once. Howl looked at Calcifer, shrugged, and turned away to give Michael a whole lot of instructions about making Sophie keep quiet for the rest of the day. Then he picked up the guitar and left at last. Sophie lay in the chair and pretended to feel twice as ill as she did. She had to let Howl get out of sight. It was a nuisance he was going to upper folding as well, but she would walk so much more slowly that she would arrive around the time he started back. The important thing was not to meet him on the way. She watched Michael slyly while he spread out his spell and scratched his head over it. She waited until he dragged big leather books off the shelves and began making notes in a frantic, depressed sort of way. When he seemed properly absorbed, Sophie muttered several times, "Stuffy in here!" Michael took no notice. "Terribly stuffy," Sophie said, getting up and shambling to the door. "Fresh air." She opened the door and climbed out. Calcifer obligingly stopped the castle dead while she did. Sophie landed in the heather and took a look round to get her bearings. The road over the hills to Upper Folding was a sandy line through the heather just downhill from the castle. Naturally, Calcifer would not make things inconvenient for Howl. Sophie set off toward it. She felt a little sad. She was going to miss Michael and Calcifer. She was almost at the road when there was shouting behind her. Michael came bounding down the hillside after her, and the tall black castle came bobbling along behind him, shedding anxious puffs of smoke from all four turrets. "What are you doing?" Michael said when he caught up. From the way he looked at her, Sophie could see he thought the scarecrow had sent her wrong in the head. "I'm perfectly all right," Sophie said indignantly. "I'm simply going to see my other sister's granddaughter. She's called Lettie, too. Now, do you understand?" "Where does she live?" Michael demanded, as if he thought Sophie might not know. "Upper Folding," said Sophie. "But that's over 10 miles away," Michael said. "I promised Howl I'd make you rest. I can't let you go. I told him I wouldn't let you out of my sight." Sophie did not look very kindly on this. Howl thought she was useful now because he wanted her to see the king. Of course he did not want her to leave the castle. "Huh," she said. "Besides," said Michael, slowly grasping the situation, "Howl must have gone to Upper Folding too." "I'm quite sure he had," said Sophie. "Then you're anxious about this girl. She's your great niece," Michael said, arriving at the point at last. "I see. But I can't let you go." "I'm going," said Sophie. "But if Howl sees you there, he'll be furious," Michael went on, working things out. "Because I promised him he'll be mad with both of us. You ought to rest." Then, when Sophie was almost ready to hit him, he exclaimed, "Wait! There's a pair of 7-league boots in the broom cupboard." He took Sophie by her skinny old wrist and towed her uphill to the waiting castle. She was forced to give little hops in order not to catch her feet in the heather. "But," she panted, 7 leagues is 20. 1 mile. I'd be halfway to Porthaven in 2 strides. "No, it's 10.5 miles a step," said Michael. "That makes Upper Folding almost exactly. If we each take 1 boot and go together, then I won't be letting you out of my sight, and you won't be doing anything strenuous, and we'll get there before Howl does. So he won't even know we've been. That solves all our problems beautifully." Michael was so pleased with himself that Sophie did not have the heart to protest. She shrugged and supposed Michael had better find out about the 2 Letties before they changed looks again. It was more honest this way. But when Michael fetched the boots from the broom cupboard, Sophie began to have doubts. Up to now, she had thought they were 2 leather buckets that had somehow lost their handles and then got a little squashed. "You're supposed to put your foot in them, shoe and all," Michael explained as he carried the 2 heavy bucket-shaped things to the door. "These are the prototypes of the boots Howl made for the king's army. We managed to get the later ones a bit lighter and more boot-shaped." He and Sophie sat on the doorstep and each put 1 foot in a boot. "Point yourself toward Upper Folding before you put the boot down," Michael warned her. He and Sophie stood up on the foot which was in an ordinary shoe and carefully swung themselves round to face Upper Folding. "Now, tread," said Michael. Zip! The landscape instantly rushed past them so fast it was only a blur, a gray-green blur for the land and a blue-gray blur for the sky. The wind of their going tore at Sophie's hair and dragged every wrinkle in her face backward until she thought she would arrive with half her face behind each ear. The rushing stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Everything was calm and sunny. They were knee-deep in buttercups in the middle of Upper Folding Village Common. A cow nearby stared at them. Beyond it, thatched cottages drowsed under trees. Unfortunately, the bucket-like boot was so heavy that Sophie staggered as she landed. "Don't put that foot down!" Michael yelled too late. There was another zipping blur and more rushing wind. When it stopped, Sophie found herself right down the folding valley, almost into marsh folding. "Oh, drat," she said, and hopped carefully round on her shoe and tried again. Zip, blur, and she was back on upper folding green again, staggering forward with the weight of the boot. She had a glimpse of Michael diving to catch her. Zip, blur. "Oh, bother," wailed Sophie. She was up in the hills again. The crooked black shape of the castle was drifting peacefully nearby. Calcifer was amusing himself, blowing black smoke rings from one turret. Sophie saw that much before her shoe caught in the heather, and she stumbled forward again. Zip, zip. This time Sophie visited in rapid succession the market, square of market chipping and the front lawn of a very grand mansion. "Blow," she cried. Drat, one word for each place. And she was off again with her own momentum and another zip. Right down at the end of that valley on a field somewhere, a large red bull raised its ringed nose from the grass and thoughtfully lowered its horns. "I'm just leaving, my good beast," Sophie cried, hopping herself round frantically. Zip back to the mansion, zip to Market Square, zip. And there was the castle yet again. She was getting the hang of it. Zip, here was upper folding, but how did you stop? Zip, oh confound it, Sophie cried, almost in marsh folding again. This time she hopped round very carefully and trod with great deliberation. Zip! And fortunately the boot landed in a cow pad and she sat down with a thump. Michael sprinted up before Sophie could move and dragged the boot off her foot. "Thank you," Sophie cried breathlessly. "There seemed no reason why I should ever stop." Sophie's heart pounded a bit as they walked across the common to Mrs. Fairfax's house, but only in the way hearts do when you have done a lot rather quickly. She felt very grateful for whatever Howl and Calcifer had done. "Nice place," Michael remarked as he hid the boots in Mrs. Fairfax's hedge. Sophie agreed. The house was the biggest in the village. It was thatched with white walls between the black beams, and Sophie, remember from visits as a child? You walked up to the porch, through a garden crowded with flowers and humming with bees. Over the porch, honeysuckle and a white climbing rose were competing as to which could give most work to the bees. It was a perfect, hot summer morning down here in upper folding. Mrs. Fairfax answered the door herself. She was one of those plump, comfortable ladies with swathes of butter-colored hair coiled round her head who made you feel good with life just to look at her. Sophie felt just the tiniest bit envious of Lettie. Mrs. Fairfax looked from Sophie to Michael. She had seen Sophie last a year ago as a girl of 17, and there was no reason for her to recognize her as an old woman of 90. "Good morning to you," she said politely. Sophie sighed. Michael said, "This is Lettie Hatter's great aunt. I brought her to see Lettie." "Oh, I thought the face looked familiar," Mrs. Fairfax exclaimed. "There's quite a family likeness. Do come in. Lettie's little bit busy just now, but have some scones and honey while you wait." She opened her front door wider. Instantly, a large collie dog squeezed past Mrs. Fairfax's skirts, barged between Sophie and Michael, and ran across the nearest flower bed, snapping off flowers right and left. "Oh, stop him," Mrs. Fairfax gasped, flying off in pursuit. "I don't want him out just now." There was a minute or so of helter-skelter chase in which the dog ran hither and thither, whining in a disturbed way, and Mrs. Fairfax and Sophie ran after the dog, jumping flower beds and getting in one another's way, and Michael ran after Sophie, crying, Stop! You'll make yourself ill." Then the dog set off loping round one corner of the house. Michael realized that the way to stop Sophie was to stop the dog. He made a crosswise dash through the flower beds, plunged round the house after the dog, and seized it by two handfuls of its thick coat just as it reached the orchard at the back. Sophie hobbled up to find Michael pulling the dog away backward and making such strange faces at her that she thought at first he was ill. But he jerked his head so often toward the orchard that she realized he was trying to tell her something. She stuck her face round the corner of the house, expecting to see a swarm of bees. Howl was there with Lettie. They were in a grove of mossy apple trees, in full bloom, with a row of beehives in the distance. Lettie sat in a white garden seat. Howl was kneeling on one knee in the grass at her feet, holding one of her hands and looking noble and ardent. Lettie was smiling lovingly at him. But the worst of it, as far as Sophie was concerned, was that Lettie did not look like Martha at all. She was her own extremely beautiful self. She was wearing a dress of the same kind of pinks and white as the crowded apple blossom overhead. Her dark hair trailed in glossy curls over one shoulder, and her eyes shone with devotion for Howl. Sophie brought her head back round the corner and looked with dismay at Michael holding the whining collie dog. He must have had a speed spell with him, Michael whispered, equally dismayed. Mrs. Fairfax caught them up, panting and trying to pin back a loose coil of her buttery hair. "Bad dog," she said in a fierce whisper to the collie. "I'll put a spell on you if you do that once more." The dog blinked and crouched down. Mrs. Fairfax pointed a stern finger. "Into the house! Stay in the house!" The collie shook himself free of Michael's hands and slunk away round the house again. "Thank you so much," Mrs. Fairfax said to Michael as they all followed it. "He will keep trying to bite Lettie's visitor. Inside!" she shouted sternly in the front garden as the collie seemed to be thinking of going round the house and getting the orchard the other way. The dog gave her a woeful look over its shoulder and crawled dismally indoors through the porch. "That dog may have the right idea," Sophie said. "Mrs. Fairfax, do you know who Lettie's visitor is?" Mrs. Fairfax chuckled. "The wizard Pendragon or Howl or whatever he calls himself," she said. "But Lettie and I don't let on we know it. Amused me when he first turned up, calling himself Sylvester Oak, because I could see he'd forgotten me, though I hadn't forgotten him, even though his hair used to be black in his student days." Mrs. Fairfax by now had her hands folded on front of her and was standing bolt upright, prepared to talk all day, as Sophie had often seen her do before. "He was my old tutor's very last pupil, before she retired. When Mr. Fairfax was alive, he used to like me to transport us both to Kingsbury to see a show from time to time. I can manage too, very nicely if I take it slowly, and I always used to drop in on old Mrs. Penstemon while I was there. She likes her old pupils to keep in touch. And one time she introduced this young Howl to us. Oh, she was proud of him. She taught Wizard Suleiman too, and she, said Howl was twice as good. But don't you know the reputation Howl has?" Michael interrupted. Getting into Mrs. Fairfax's conversation was rather like getting into a skipping rope. You had to choose the exact moment, but once you were in, you were in. Mrs. Fairfax turned herself slightly to face Michael. "Most of it's just talk to my mind," she said. Michael opened his mouth to say that it was not, but he was in the skipping rope then, and it went on turning. "And I said to Lettie, 'Here's your big chance, my love.' I knew Howl could teach her 20 times more than I could, for I don't mind telling you, Lettie's brains go way beyond mine, and she could end up in the same league as the Witch of the Waste, only in a good way. Lettie's a good girl, and I'm fond of her. If Mrs. Penstemon was still teaching, I'd have Lettie go to her tomorrow, but she isn't. So I said, 'Lettie, here's Wizard Howl courting you, and you could do worse than to fall in love with him yourself and let him be your teacher. The pair of you will go far.' I don't think Lettie was too keen on the idea at first, but she's been softening lately, and today it seems to be going beautifully." Here Mrs. Fairfax paused to beam benevolently at Michael, and Sophie dashed into the skipping rope for her turn. "But someone told me Lettie was fond of someone else," she said. "Sorry for him, you mean," said Mrs. Fairfax. She lowered her voice. "There's a terrible disability there," she whispered suggestively, "and it's asking too much of any girl. I told him so. I'm sorry for him myself." Sophie managed a mystified, "Oh, but it's a fearsomely strong spell. It's very sad," Mrs. Fairfax would go on. "I had to tell him there's no way someone of my abilities can break anything that's put on by the Witch of the Waste. Howl might, but of course he can't ask Howl, can he?" Here Michael, who kept looking nervously to the corner of the house in case Howl came round it and discovered them, managed to trample through the skipping rope and stop it by saying, "I think we'd better be going." "Are you sure you won't come in for a taste of my honey?" asked Mrs. Fairfax. "I use it in nearly all my spells, you know." And she was off again, this time about the magical properties of honey. Michael and Sophie walked purposefully down the path to the gate, and Mrs. Fairfax drifted behind them, talking away and sorrowfully straightening plants that the dog had bent as she talked. Sophie, meanwhile, racked her brain for a way to find out how Mrs. Fairfax knew Lettie was Lettie without upsetting Michael. Mrs. Fairfax paused to gasp a bit as she heaved a large lupine upright. Sophie took the plunge. "Mrs. Fairfax, wasn't it my niece Martha who was supposed to come to you?" "Naughty girls!" Mrs. Fairfax said, smiling and shaking her head as she emerged from the lupine. "As if I wouldn't recognize one of my own honey-based spells. But as I said to her at the time, I'm not one to keep anyone against their will, and I'd always rather teach someone who wants to learn. Only, I said to her, I'll have no pretense here. You stay as your own self or not at all. And it's worked out very happily, as you see. Are you sure you won't stay and ask her yourself?" "I think we'd better go," Sophie said. "We have to get back," Michael added, with another nervous look toward the orchard. He collected the 7-league boots from the hedge and set one down outside the gate for Sophie. "And I'm going to hold on to you this time," he said. Mrs. Fairfax leaned over her gate while Sophie inserted her foot in the boot. "7 leaguers," she said. "Would you believe I've not seen any of those for years? Very useful things for someone your age, Mrs. I wouldn't mind a pair myself these days. So it's you Lettie inherits her witchcraft from, is it? Not that it necessarily runs in families, but as often as not..." Michael took hold of Sophie's arm and pulled. Both boots came down, and the rest of Mrs. Fairfax's talk vanished in the zip and rush of air. Next moment, Michael had to brace his feet in order not to collide with the castle. The door was open. Inside, Calcifer was roaring, "Porthaven door! Someone's been banging on it ever since you left," and which Michael has trouble with a spell. It was the sea captain come for his wind spell at last, and not at all pleased at having to wait. "If I miss my tide, boy," he said to Michael, "I shall have a word with the sorcerer about you. I don't like lazy boys." Michael, in Sophie's opinion, was far too polite to him, but she was, feeling too dejected to interfere. When the captain had gone, Michael went to the bench to frown over his spell again, and Sophie sat silently. Mending her stockings, she had only one pair, and her knobby feet had worn huge holes in them. Her gray dress by this time was frayed and dirty. She wondered whether she dared cut the least stained bits out of Howl's ruined blue and silver suit to make herself a new skirt with, but she did not quite dare. "Sophie," Michael said, looking up from his 11th page of notes, "how many nieces have you?" Sophie had been afraid Michael would start asking questions. "When you get to my age, my lad," she said, "you lose count. They all look so alike. Those 2 Letties could be twins to my mind." "Oh no, not really," Michael said to her surprise. "The niece in upper folding isn't as pretty as my Lettie." He tore up the 11th page and made a 12th. "I'm glad Howl didn't meet my Lettie," he said. He began on his 13th page and tore that up too. "I wanted to laugh when that Mrs. Fairfax said she knew who Howl was, didn't you?" "No," said Sophie. It had made no difference to Lettie's feelings. She thought of Lettie's bright, adoring face under the apple blossom. "First, suppose there's no chance," she asked hopelessly, "that Howl could be properly in love this time?" Calcifer snorted green sparks up the chimney. "I was afraid you'd start thinking like that," Michael said. "But you'd be deceiving yourself just like Mrs. Fairfax." "How do you know?" said Sophie. Calcifer and Michael exchanged glances. "Did he forget to spend at least an hour in the bathroom this morning?" Michael asked. "He was in there 2 hours," said Calcifer, putting spells on his face. "Vain fool!" "There you are, then," said Michael. "The day Howl forgets to do that will be the day I believe he's really in love and not before." Sophie thought of Howl on one knee in the orchard, posing to look as handsome as possible, and she knew they were right. She thought of going to the bathroom and tipping all Howl's beauty spells down the toilet. But she did not quite dare. Instead, she hobbled up and fetched the blue and silver suit which she spent the rest of the day cutting little blue triangles out of in order to make a patchwork sort of skirt. Michael patted her shoulder kindly as he came to throw all 17 pages of his notes onto Calcifer. "Everyone gets over things in the end, you know," he said. By this time it was clear Michael was having trouble with his spell. He gave up notes and scraped some soot off the chimney. Calcifer craned round to watch him in a mystified way. Michael took a withered root from one of the bags hanging on the beams and put it in the soot. Then, after much thought, he turned the doorknob blue down and vanished for 20 minutes into Porthaven. He came back with a large walled seashell and put that with the root and the soot. After that, he tore up pages and pages of paper and put those in too. He put the lot in front of the human skull and stood blowing on it so that soot and bits of paper whirled all over the bench. "What's he doing, do you think?" Calcifer asked Sophie. Michael gave up blowing and started mashing everything, paper and all, with a pestle and mortar, looking at the skull expectantly from time to time. Nothing happened, so he tried different ingredients from bags and jars. "I feel bad about spying on Howl," he announced as he pounded a third set of ingredients to death in a bowl. "He may be fickle too. Females, but he's been awfully good to me. He took me in when I was just an unwanted orphan sitting on his doorstep in Porthaven." "How did that come about?" asked Sophie as she snipped put another blue triangle. "My mother died and my father got drowned in a storm," Michael said. "And nobody wants you when that happens. I had to leave our house because I couldn't pay rent, and I tried to live in the streets, but people kept turning me off doorsteps and out of boats until the only place I could think of to go was somewhere everyone was too scared to interfere with. Howl had just started up in a small way as sorcerer, Jenkins then, but everyone said his house had devils in it, so I slept on his doorstep for a couple of nights until Howl opened the door one morning on his way to buy bread, and I fell inside. So he said I could wait indoors while he got something to eat. I went in, and there was Calcifer, and I started talking to him because I never met a demon before." "What did you talk about?" said Sophie, wondering if Calcifer had asked Michael to break his contract too. "He told me his troubles and dripped on me." "Didn't you?" said Calcifer. It didn't seem to occur to him that I might have troubles as well. "I don't think you have. You just grumble a lot," Michael said. "You were quite nice to me that morning, and I think Howl was impressed. But you know how he is. He didn't tell me I could stay, but he just didn't tell me to go. So I started being useful wherever I could, like looking after money so that he didn't spend it all as soon as he got it, and so on." The spell gave a sort of a woof then and exploded mildly. Michael brushed soot off the skull, sighing, and tried new ingredients. Sophie began making a patchwork of blue triangles round her feet on the floor. "I did make lots of stupid mistakes when I first started," Michael went on. "Howl was awfully nice about it. I thought I'd got over that now, and I think I do help with money. Howl buys such expensive clothes." He says no one's going to employ a wizard who looks as if he can't make money at the trade. That's just because he likes clothes, said Calcifer. His orange eyes watched Sophie at work rather meaningly. This suit was spoiled, Sophie said. It isn't just clothes, Michael said. Remember last winter when we were down to your last log and Howl went off and bought the skull? And that stupid guitar? I was really annoyed with him. He said they looked good. What did you do about logs? Sophie asked. Howl conjured some from someone who owed him money, Michael said. At least he said they did, and I just hoped he was telling the truth. And we ate seaweed. Howl says it's good for you. Nice stuff, murmured Calcifer, dry and crackly. I hate it, said Michael, staring abstractedly at his bowl of pounded stuff. I don't know, there should be 7 ingredients unless it's 7 processes, but let's try it in a pinnacle anyway. He put the bowl on the floor and chalked a sort of F5 pointed star around it. The powder exploded with a force that blew Sophie's triangles into the hearth. Michael swore and hurriedly rubbed out the chalk. Sophie, he said, I'm stuck in this spell. You don't think you could possibly help me, do you? Just like someone bringing their homework to their granny, Sophie thought, collecting triangles and patiently laying them out again. Let's have a look, she said cautiously. I don't know anything about magic, you know. Michael eagerly thrust a strange, slightly shiny paper into her hand. It looked unusual, even for a spell. It was printed in bold letters, but they were slightly gray and blurred, and there were gray blurs like retreating storm clouds round all the edges. See what you think, said Michael. Sophie read, go and catch a falling star. Get with child of mandrake root. Tell me where all the past years are, or who cleft the devil's foot. Teach me to hear the mermaids singing, or to keep off envy stinging, and find what wind serves to advance an honest mind. Decide what this is about. Write a second verse yourself. It puzzled Sophie exceedingly. It was not quite like any of the spells she had snooped at before. She plowed through it twice, not really, helped by Michael eagerly explaining as she tried to read. You know, Howl told me that advanced spells have a puzzle in them. Well, I decided at first that every line was meant to be a puzzle. I used soot with sparks in it for the falling star and a seashell for the mermaids singing. And I thought I might count as a child, so I got a mandrake root down, and I wrote out a list of past years from the almanacs, but I wasn't sure about that. Maybe that's where I went wrong. And could the thing that stopped stinging be dock leaf? I hadn't thought of that before. Anyway, none of it works. I'm not surprised, said Sophie. It looks to me like a set of impossible things to do, but Michael was not having that. If the things were impossible, he pointed out reasonably, no one would ever be able to do the spell. And he added, I'm so ashamed of spying on Howl that I want to make up for it by getting this spell right. Very well, said Sophie. Let's start with decide what this is all about. That ought to start things moving, if deciding is part of the spell anyway. Michael was not having that either. No, he said. It's the sort of spell that reveals itself as you do it. That's what the last line means. When you write the second half, saying what the spell means, that makes it work. Those kind of very advanced. We have to crack the first bit first. Sophie collected her blue triangles into a pile again. Let's ask. Calcifer, she suggested. Calcifer, who, but this was yet another thing Michael did not let her do. No, be quiet. I think Calcifer's part of the spell. Look at the way it says, tell me and teach me. I thought at first it meant teach the skull, but that didn't work, so it must be Calcifer. You can do it by yourself if you sit on everything I have to say, Sophie said. Anyway, surely Calcifer must know who cleft his own foot. Calcifer flared up a little at this. I haven't got any feet. I'm a demon, not a devil. Saying which, he retreated right under his logs, where he could be heard chinking about, muttering, "Lot of nonsense." All the rest of the time, Sophie and Michael were discussing the spell. By this time, the puzzle had got a grip on Sophie. She packed away her blue triangles, fetched pen and paper, and started making notes in the same sort of quantities that Michael had. For the rest of the day, she and Michael sat staring into the distance, nibbling quills and throwing out suggestions at one another. An average page of Sophie's notes read, "Does garlic keep off envy? I could cut a star out of paper and drop it. Could we tell it to howl? Howl would like mermaids better than Calcifer. Do not think Howl's mind is honest. Is Calcifer's? Where are the past years anyway? Does it mean one of? Those dry roots must bear fruit. Planted next to dock leaf in a seashell, cloven hoof most things. But horses, shoe a horse with a clove of garlic. Wind, smell, wind of 7-league boots is howl. Devil, cloven toes in 7-league boots. Mermaids in boots. As Sophie wrote this, Michael asked equally desperately, could the wind be some sort of pulley, an honest man being hanged? That's black magic, though. Let's have supper, said Sophie. They ate bread and cheese, still staring into the distance. At last, Sophie said, Michael, for goodness sake, let's give up guessing and try just doing what it says. Where's the best place to catch a falling? Star? Out on the hills? Porthaven marshes are flatter, Michael said. Can we? Shooting? Stars go awfully fast. So can we in S7-league boots, Sophie pointed out. Michael sprang up, full of relief and delight. I think you've got it, he said, scrambling for the boots. Let's go and try. They went out into the street in Porthaven. It was a bright, balmy night. As soon as they had reached the end of the street, however, Michael remembered that Sophie had been ill that morning and began worrying about the effect of night air on her health. Sophie told him not to be silly. She stumped gamely along with her stick until they left the lighted windows behind and the night became wide and damp and chilly. The marshes smelled of salt and earth. The sea glittered and softly swished to the rear. Sophie could feel more than see the miles and miles of flatness stretching away in front of them. What she could see were bands of low bluish mist and pale glimmers of marshy pools over and over again until they built into a pale line where the sky started. The sky was everywhere else huger still. The Milky Way looked like a band of mist risen from the marshes, and the keen stars twinkled through it. Michael and Sophie stood, each with a boot ready on the ground in front of them, waiting for one of the stars to move. After about an hour, Sophie had to pretend she was not shivering for fear of worrying Michael. Half an hour later, Michael said, May is not the right time of the year. August or November is best. Half an hour after that, he said in a worried way, What do we do? About the mandrake root? Let's see to this part before we worry about that, Sophie said, biting her teeth together while she spoke for fear they would chatter. Sometime later, Michael said, You go home, Sophie. It's my spell, after all. Sophie had her mouth open to say that this was a very good idea, when one of the stars came unstuck from the firmament and darted in a white streak down the sky. There's one, Sophie shrieked instead. Michael thumped his foot into his boot and was off. Sophie braced herself with her stick and was off a second later. Zip, squash, down, far out in the marshes with mist and emptiness and dull glimmering, pools in all directions. Sophie stabbed her stick into the ground and just managed to stand still. Michael's boot was a dark blot standing just beside her. Michael himself was a sploshy sound of madly running feet somewhere ahead. And there was the falling star. Sophie could see it, a little white, descending flame shape a few yards beyond the dark movements that were Michael. The bright shape was coming down slowly now, and it looked as if Michael might catch it. Sophie dragged her shoe out of the boot. Come on, stick! She crowed. "Get me there!" And she set off at top hobble, leaping across tussocks and staggering through pools with her eyes on that little white light. By the time she caught up, Michael was stalking the star with soft steps, both arms out to catch it. Sophie could see him outlined against the star's light. The star was drifting level with Michael's hands and only a step or so beyond. It was looking back at him nervously. How odd, Sophie thought. It was made of light. It lit up a white ring of grass and reeds and black pools round Michael, and yet it had big, anxious eyes peering backward at Michael and a small, pointed face. Sophie's arrival frightened it. It gave an erratic swoop and cried out in a shrill, crackling voice, "What is it?" "What do you want?" Sophie tried to say to Michael. "Do stop, it's terrified." But she had no breath left to speak with. "I only want to catch you," Michael explained. "I won't hurt you." No, the star crackled desperately. "That's wrong. I'm supposed to die." "But I could save you if you'd let me catch you," Michael told it gently. "No," cried the star. "I'd rather die." It dived away from Michael's fingers. Michael plunged for it, but it was too quick for him. It swooped for the nearest marsh pool, and the black water leaped into a blaze of whiteness for just an instant. Then there was a small dying sizzle. When Sophie hobbled over, Michael was standing watching. The last light fade out of a little round lump under the dark water. "That was sad," Sophie said. Michael sighed. "Yes, my heart sort of went out to it. Let's go home. I'm sick of this spell." It took them 20 minutes to find the boots. Sophie thought it was a miracle they found them at all. "You know," Michael said, as they trudged dejectedly through the dark streets of Porthaven, "I can tell I'll never be able to do this spell. It's too advanced for me. I shall have to ask Howl. I hate giving in, but at least I'll get some sense out of Howl now this Lettie Hatter's given in to him." This did not cheer Sophie up at all, in which Calcifer promises Sophie a hint. Howl must have come back while Sophie and Michael were out. He came out of the bathroom while Sophie was frying breakfast on Calcifer and sat gracefully in the chair, groomed and glowing and smelling of honeysuckle. "Dear Sophie," he said, "always busy. You were hard at work yesterday, weren't you, in spite of my advice? Why have you made a jigsaw puzzle of my best suit? Just a friendly inquiry, you know." "You jellied it the other day," said Sophie. "I'm making it over." "I can do that," said Hal. "I thought I showed you. I can also make you a pair of S7 League boots of your own if you give me your size. Something practical in brown calf, perhaps. It's amazing the way one can take a step 10.5 miles long and still always land in a cow pat." "It may have been a bull pat," said Sophie. "I dare say you found mud from the marshes on them too. A person my age needs a lot of exercise." "You were even busier than I realized then," said Howl, "because when I happened to tear my eyes from Lettie's lovely face for Anne, yesterday, I could have sworn I saw your long nose poking the corner of the house." "Mrs. Fairfax is a family friend," said Sophie. "How was I to know you? Would be there too." "You have an instinct, Sophie, that's how," said Howl. "Nothing is safe from you. If I were to court a girl who lived on an iceberg in the middle of an ocean, sooner or later, probably sooner, I'd look up to see you swooping overhead on a broomstick. In fact, by now I'd be disappointed in you if I didn't see you." "Are you off to the iceberg today?" Sophie retorted. "From the look on Lettie's face yesterday, there's nothing that need keep you there." "You wrong me, Sophie," Hal said. He sounded deeply injured. Sophie looked suspiciously sideways, beyond the red jewel swinging. In Howl's ear, his profile looked sad and noble. "Long years will pass before I leave Lettie," he said, "and in fact, I'm off to see the king again today. Satisfied, Mrs. Nose?" Sophie was not sure she believed a word of this, though it was. Certainly to Kingsbury, with the doorknob red down, that Howl departed after breakfast, waving Michael aside when Michael tried to consult him about the perplexing spell. Michael, since he had nothing else to do, left too. He said he might as well go to Cesari's. Sophie was left alone. She still did not truly believe what Howl had said about Lettie, but she had been wrong about him before, and she had only Michael and Calcifer's word for Howl's behavior after all. She collected up all the little blue triangles of cloth and began guiltily sewing them back into the silver fishing net, which was all that was left of the suit. When someone knocked at the door, she started violently, thinking it was the scarecrow again. "Porthaven door," Calcifer said, flickering a purple grin at her. "That should be all right then." Sophie hobbled over and opened it. Blew down. There was a cart horse outside. The young fellow of 50, who was leading it, wondered if Mrs. Witch had something which might stop at casting shoes all the time. "I'll see," said Sophie. She hobbled over to the grate. "What shall I do?" she whispered. "Yellow powder, 4th jar along on the 2nd shelf," Calcifer whispered back. "Those spells are mostly belief. Don't look uncertain when you give it to him." So Sophie poured yellow powder into a square of paper as she had seen Michael do, twisted it smartly, and hobbled to the door with it. "There you are, my boy," she said. "That'll stick the shoes on harder than any 100 nails. Do you hear me, horse? You won't need A. Smith for the next year. That'll be a penny, thank you." It was quite a busy day. Sophie had to put down her sewing and sell. With Calcifer's help, a spell to unblock drains, another to fetch goats, and something to make good beer, the only one that gave her any trouble was the customer who pounded on the door in Kingsbury. Sophie opened it, read down to find a richly dressed boy, not much older than Michael, white-faced and sweating, wringing his hands on the doorstep. "Madam Sorceress, for pity's sake," he said. "I have to fight a duel at dawn tomorrow. Give me something to make sure I win. I'll pay any." "Some, you ask?" Sophie looked over her shoulder at Calcifer, and Calcifer made faces back, meaning that there was no such thing ready-made. And that wouldn't be right at all, Sophie told the boy severely. "Besides, dueling is wrong. Then just give me something that lets me have a fair chance," the lad said desperately. Sophie looked at him. He was very undersized and clearly in a great state of ear. He had that hopeless look a person has who always loses at everything. "I'll see what I can do," Sophie said. She hobbled over to the shelves and scanned the jars. The red one labeled Cayenne looked the most likely. Sophie poured a generous heap of it on a square of paper. She stood the human skull beside it. "Because you must know more about this than I do," she muttered at it. The young man was leaning anxiously round the door to watch. Sophie took up a knife and made what she hoped would look like mystic passes over the heap of pepper. "You ought to make a fair fight," she mumbled. "A fair fight, understand?" She screwed the paper up and hobbled to the door with it. "Throw this in the air when the duel starts," she told the undersized young man, "and it will give you the same chance as the other man. After that, whether you win or not depends on you." The undersized young man was so grateful that he tried to give her a gold piece. Sophie refused to take it, so he gave her a 2-penny bit instead and went away, whistling happily. "I feel a fraud," Sophie said as she stowed the money under the hearthstone. "Not I would like to be there at that fight." "So would I," crackled Calcifer. "When are you going to release me so that I can go and see things like that?" "When I've got even a hint about this contract," Sophie said. "You may get one later today," said Calcifer. Michael breezed in toward the end of the afternoon. He took an anxious look round to make sure Howl had not come home first and went to the bench, where he got things out to make it look as if he had been busy singing cheerfully while he did. "I envy you being able to walk all that way so easily," Sophie said, sewing a blue triangle to silver braid. "How was Ma, my niece?" Michael gladly left the workbench and sat on the stool by the hearth to tell her all about his day. Then he asked about Sophie's. The result was that when Howl shouldered the door open with his arms full of parcels, Michael was not even looking busy. He was rolling around on the stool, laughing at the duel spell. Howl backed into the door to shut it and leaned there in a tragic attitude. "Look at you all," he said. "Ruin stares me in the face. I slave all day for you all, and not one of you, even Calcifer, can spare time to say hello." Michael sprang up guiltily, and Calcifer said, "I never do say hello. Is something wrong?" asked Sophie. "That's better," said Howl. "Some of you are pretending to notice me. At last, how kind of you to ask, Sophie." "Yes, something is wrong. The king has asked me officially to find his brother for him, with a strong hint that destroying the Witch of the Waste would come in handy too, and you all sit there and laugh." By now it was clear that Howl was in a mood to produce green slime. Any second, Sophie hurriedly put her sewing away. "I'll make some hot buttered toast," she said. "Is that all you can do in the face of tragedy?" Howl asked. "Make toast? No, don't get up. I've trudged here laden with stuff for you, so the least you can do is show polite interest. Here." He tipped a shower of parcels into Sophie's lap and handed another to Michael. Mystified, Sophie unwrapped things: several pairs of silk stockings, 2 parcels of the finesse cambric petticoats with flounces, lace, and satin insets, a pair of elastic-sided boots in dove-gray suede, a lace shawl, and a dress of gray-watered silk trimmed with lace that matched the shawl. Sophie took one professional look at each and gasped. The lace alone was worth a fortune. She stroked the silk of the dress, awed. Michael unwrapped a handsome new velvet suit. "You must have spent every bit that was in the silk purse," he said ungratefully. "I don't need this. You're the one who needs a new suit." Howl hooked his boot into what remained of the bee blue and silver suit and held it up ruefully. Sophie had been working hard, but it was still more whole than suit. "How selfless I am," he said, "but I can't send you and Sophie to blacken my name to the king in rags. The king would think I didn't look after my old mother properly." "Well, Sophie, are the boots the right size?" Sophie looked up from her awed stroking. "Are you being kind," she said, "or cowardly?" "Thank you very much, and no, I won't." "What ingratitude!" Howl exclaimed, spreading out both arms. "Let's have green slime again, after which I shall be forced to move the castle 1,000 miles away and never see my lovely Lettie again." Michael looked at Sophie imploringly. Sophie glowered. She saw well enough that the happiness of both her sisters depended on her agreeing to see the king, with green slime in reserve. "You haven't asked me to do anything yet," she said. "You've just said I'm going to." Howl smiled. "And you are going to, aren't you? All right. When do you want me to go?" Sophie said. "Tomorrow afternoon," said Howl. "Michael can go as your footman. The king's expecting you." He sat on the stool and began explaining very clearly and soberly just what Sophie was to say. There was no trace of the green slime mood. Now things were going Howl's way, Sophie noticed. She wanted to slap him. "I want you to do a very delicate job," Howl explained, "so that the king will go on giving me work like the transport spells, but not trust me with anything like finding his brother. You must tell him how I've angered the Witch of the Waste and explain what a good son I am to you, but I want you to do it in such a way that he'll understand I'm really quite useless." Howl explained in great detail. Sophie clasped her hands round the parcels and tried to take it all in, though she could not help thinking, if I was the king, I wouldn't understand a word of what the old woman was driving at. Michael, meanwhile, was hovering at Howl's elbow, trying to ask him about the perplexing spell. Howl kept thinking of new, delicate details to tell the king and waving Michael away. "Not now, Michael. And it occurred to me, Sophie, that you might want some practice in order not to find the palace overwhelming. We don't want you coming over weird in the middle of the interview." "Not yet, Michael. So I arranged for you to pay a call to my old tutor, Mrs. Penstemon. She's a grand old thing. In some ways, she's grander than the king. So you'll be quite used to that kind of thing by the time you get to the palace." By this time, Sophie was wishing she had never agreed. She was heartily relieved when Howl at last turned to Michael. "Right, Michael, your turn now." What is it? Michael waved the shiny gray paper and explained in an unhappy rush how impossible the spell seemed to do. Howl seemed faintly astonished to hear this, but he took the paper saying, "Now, where was your problem?" and spread it out. He stared at it. One of his eyebrows shot up. "I tried it as a puzzle, and I tried doing just what it says," Michael explained, "but Sophie and I couldn't catch the falling star." "Great gods above!" Howl exclaimed. He started to laugh and bit his lip to stop himself. "But Michael, this isn't the spell I left you." "Where did you find it?" "On the bench. In that heap of things Sophie piled round the skull," said Michael. "It as the only new spell there, so I thought." Howl leaped up and sorted among the things on the bench. "Sophie strikes again," he said. Things skidded right and left as he searched. "I might have known. No, the proper spell's not here." He tapped the skull thoughtfully on its brown, shiny dome. "You're doing, friend? I have a notion you come from there. I'm sure the guitar does. Sophie dear." "What?" said Sophie. "Busy old fool, unruly Sophie," said Howl. "Am I right in thinking that you turned my doorknob black side down and stuck your long nose out through it?" "Just my finger," Sophie said with dignity. "Is a spell must have got through." "Didn't it occur to either of you that it doesn't look like spells usually do?" "Spells often look peculiar," Michael said. "What is it really?" Howl gave a snort of laughter. "Decide what this is about. Write A, second verse." "Oh Lord," he said, and ran for the stairs. "I'll show you," he called as his feet pounded up them. "I think we wasted out time rushing around the marshes last night," Sophie said. Michael nodded gloomily. Sophie could see he was feeling a fool. "It was my fault," she said. "I opened the door." "What was outside?" Michael asked with great interest. But Howl came charging downstairs just then. "I haven't got that book after all," he said. He seemed upset now. "Michael, did I hear? You say you went out and tried to catch a shooting star?" "Yes, but it was scared stiff and fell in a pool and drowned," Michael said. "Thank goodness for that," said Howl. "It was very sad," Sophie said. "Sad, was it?" said Howl, more upset than ever. "It was your idea, was it? It would be. I can just see you hopping about the marshes, encouraging him. Let me tell you, that was the most stupid thing he's ever done in his life. He'd have been more than sad if he'd chanced to catch the thing. And you..." Calcifer flickered sleepily up the chimney. "What's all this fuss about?" he demanded. "You caught one yourself, didn't you?" "Yes, and Howl began, turning his glass marble glare on Calcifer. But he pulled himself together and turned to Michael instead. "Michael, promise me you'll never try to catch one again." "I promise," Michael said willingly. "What is that writing if it's not a spell?" Howl looked at the gray paper in his hand. "It's called Song, Anne. That's what it is, I suppose. But it's not all here and I can't remember the rest of it." He stood and thought as if a new idea had struck him, which obviously worried him. "I think the next verse was important," he said. "I better take it back and see." He went to the door and turned the knob black down. Then he paused. He looked round at Michael and Sophie, who were naturally enough both staring at the knob. "All right," he said. "I know Sophie will squirm through if I leave her behind, and that's not fair to Michael. Come along, both of you, so I've got you where I can keep my eye on you." He opened the door on the nothingness and walked into it. Michael fell over the stool in his rush to follow. Sophie shed parcels right and left into the hearth as she sprang up too. "Don't let any sparks get on. Those," she said hurriedly to Calcifer. "If you promise to tell me what's out there," Calcifer said. "You've had your hint, by the way." "Did I?" said Sophie. She was in too much of a hurry to attend.